Today's story is for anyone who's ever been doubted, underestimated, or made to feel small. Listen closely because what you hear today might change the way you see yourself. Have you ever had a moment where someone looked at you, paused for just a second too long, and you suddenly felt small, not because of who you are, but because of what they thought you weren't? That was the feeling that followed Aaron everywhere. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the type to take up space. He was the kind of person who spoke carefully, slowly, especially in English, because he was scared of getting even a single word wrong. And every time he tried to speak, he could sense it. That faint tightening in someone's expression, the hidden smirk, the quick glance exchanged between people who already doubted him before he even opened his mouth. It's strange how doubt feels heavier than real weight, how it sits on your shoulders like a quiet shadow. But Arun carried it every day, not because he asked for it, but because he lived in a world that made him believe he wasn't enough. He had dreams, big ones, louder than anything he could say out loud. He wanted to speak confidently, to work in a place where English wasn't something he had to survive, but something he could thrive in. He wanted to feel proud of his voice, but every time he tried, someone's reaction dimmed that spark a little more. Teachers corrected him in ways that made him feel stupid. Friends joked about his accent. Co-workers talked over him as if his ideas arrived late or never arrived at all. And the worst part wasn't the words. They were just sounds. What truly hurt were the looks. The looks told the story he feared most, that maybe they were right. Maybe he really wasn't good enough. But here's the truth about doubt, especially when it comes from others. It never just sits outside you. Slowly, quietly, it begins to seep in. At first, Aaron only heard their voices, but eventually, those voices started to sound like his own. He found himself avoiding conversations, choosing silence over embarrassment, choosing small dreams over big disappointments. It wasn't that he didn't want more. He just didn't believe he deserved more. And confidence, once it breaks, doesn't shatter loudly. It crumbles quietly, like old paper wearing thin. Yet despite everything, there was still a tiny part of him that refused to disappear. A whisper, a stubborn spark, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was meant for something different. But even that small spark was fragile. Every day, he woke up wondering if he should let it die, because believing in yourself is hard. But believing in yourself when no one else does, that feels almost impossible. Still, life has a strange way of testing us in the moments we least expect. And for Arun, that test didn't come from a stranger, a rude comment, or even a public failure. No, his breaking point arrived quietly, delivered not by someone who didn't matter, but by someone he trusted, someone who was supposed to believe in him. And when their doubt finally landed, it didn't just sting. It changed something inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment that would push everything else into motion, the moment that would force him to confront every quiet fear he had ever swallowed, the moment that would turn his story from one of shrinking into one of rising. Because sometimes the moment you think is breaking you is actually the one that's preparing you. And Aaron's moment, it was waiting just one breath away. The strange thing about doubt is that once it finds a crack, it doesn't stop. It spreads, quietly, patiently, like water slipping through stone. And for Aaron, that crack widened with every passing day. It wasn't just one person doubting him anymore. It felt like the entire world had silently agreed on one thing. He wasn't capable. At work, meetings became a battlefield. Every time he tried to contribute, someone spoke over him. Every time he offered an idea, a colleague dismissed it with a polite but cutting smile, the kind that said, "Nice try," without saying anything at all. When they needed someone to present a project, no one even asked him, even when it was his idea. And each time that happened, Arun felt himself shrinking just a little bit more. Outside of work, things weren't much different. Friends teased him without realizing the bruise it left. They would mimic the way he pronounced certain words, laughing as if it was harmless fun. "Relax, bro. We're just Joking, they'd say. But jokes that hit the same wound over and over stop being jokes. They become reminders. Reminders that no matter how much effort he was putting in, people only seemed to notice what he got wrong. Even casual conversations drained him. He found himself replaying them afterward, feeling embarrassed over tiny mistakes no one else even remembered. But the moment that struck the hardest came one evening when he was sitting at home. The person he trusted most, someone who had always encouraged him, finally said what everyone else had implied for years. Not with cruelty, not with anger, but with a tired softness that hurt even more. "Maybe you should stop pushing yourself so much," they said. "Not everyone is meant for this kind of work. It's fine to accept your limits." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. Heavy enough to settle on his chest like a stone. Heavy enough to make something inside him quietly collapse. For the first time, Aaron felt something deeper than embarrassment. He felt confirmation. If even the person who believed in him now had doubts, maybe everyone else had been right all along. Maybe he really was reaching too high. Maybe English, communication, confidence, maybe all of these things were mountains he wasn't built to climb. And that night, he stared at his reflection for a long time, not recognizing the person looking back at him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes tired, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't look like someone who had dreams. He looked like someone who had finally accepted defeat. The next morning, something changed. Not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. Arun stopped trying. He avoided eye contact at work. He kept conversations as short as possible. He declined opportunities. He watched others speak confidently while he remained quiet, invisible. Every doubt he had ever heard now played on a loop in his mind, louder than reality. And the more he stayed silent, the easier it became to stay that way. Confidence doesn't die in fire, it dies in quiet surrender. But life rarely allows surrender without consequence. And the consequence for Aaron arrived in a humiliating moment he never saw coming. A project he'd worked on for weeks was publicly credited to someone else, simply because he never spoke up to claim it. Everyone clapped, congratulated the other person, celebrated their brilliant idea. And Arun stood there in the back of the room, hands cold, heart sinking, realizing what silence truly costs. That was the moment he broke, not dramatically. There were no tears, no shouting, just a quiet, hollow ache, the kind that tells you something has to change, or you will stay this way forever. And just when he was ready to give up completely, something unexpected happened, something small, but powerful enough to shift everything. The moment that changed everything didn't arrive with fanfare. It didn't come as a dramatic speech or a sudden burst of courage. It came in the smallest, most unexpected form, a conversation that wasn't meant to be a lesson at all. A few days after the humiliation at work, Aaron sat alone in a small cafe near his office, nursing a cup of tea he wasn't really drinking. His shoulders were hunched, eyes unfocused, mind replaying the same thought on a loop. Maybe I'm just not enough. That was when an older man sitting at the next table glanced over and said something so simple, Arun almost didn't register it. "You look like someone carrying a weight that isn't yours," the man said. No judgment, no assumptions, just quiet observation. Aaron blinked, uncertain if the stranger was even speaking to him, but the man smiled gently and continued. "When people doubt you, they're only showing you the limits of their imagination, not yours." It was such a small sentence, soft, almost forgettable, but something about it landed deeply. Like a pebble thrown into still water, Aaron felt the ripple. For months, years, he had treated other people's doubt like it was proof, like their assumptions were reality. But what if they weren't? What if the problem wasn't that he believed too much in himself, but that he had believed too easily in them? The man sipped his tea before adding, "Confidence doesn't grow because people believe in you. Confidence grows because you act even when they don't." That sentence hit harder because Aaron realized how long he had waited for validation, how desperately he wanted someone to tell him he was capable before he dared to believe it himself. But life didn't work like that. No one hands you belief. You build it. Slowly, painfully, stubbornly. The stranger didn't stay long. He stood up, placed a small napkin on the table, and walked away. On the napkin were 4 words, written in shaky handwriting. Doubt is just a test. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't profound at first glance. But when Arun read it again, something clicked. He had been treating doubt like a verdict, something final. But what if it was simply a question, a challenge, a mirror meant to reveal not his weakness, but his strength? As he sat there, the cafe noise fading into the background, Arun felt the faintest shift inside him. Not confidence. No, that was too big of a word for the moment. What he felt was something smaller, a spark, a quiet decision. Maybe I can try again. Not to impress people, not to earn approval, but to prove to himself that he hadn't been wrong to dream in the first place. For the first time in a long while, he stood up a little straighter. The shame didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. The doubt didn't vanish, but it no longer felt like a wall, more like a fog he could walk through if he kept moving. He wasn't transformed yet. He wasn't suddenly brave, or fluent, or confident. But he had something more important than confidence, a reason to begin. Because understanding a truth is one thing, living it is another. And Arun was about to discover that proving yourself, especially to yourself, is the hardest and most powerful journey of all. Change never arrives in one dramatic moment. It comes in small, awkward attempts, steps that feel too tiny to matter, but still carry you forward. That's exactly how it began for Arun. The next morning, he didn't wake up transformed. He woke up tired, unsure, and still carrying the echoes of doubt. But he also woke up with a quiet promise to himself. Try once more. So he started small. At work, instead of staying silent in the meeting, he forced himself to say one sentence. His voice trembled. His accent wavered. Someone even interrupted him halfway through. But he finished his thought anyway. It was messy, imperfect, and uncomfortable. Yet somehow, it was enough. Enough to prove he hadn't surrendered. Every day after that, he tried something new. A short English podcast on his walk to work. A paragraph written in English during lunch. Practicing pronunciation while brushing his teeth. They were tiny steps, almost invisible to anyone else. But to Arun, they were victories. And each time he chose to act, he felt the smallest flicker of strength. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was resistance. Resistance against the old story he had believed for too long. But growth is never a straight line. With every small win came a new challenge. There were days he stumbled through sentences and felt the old shame tighten around his throat. Days when co-workers still talked over him, making him question why he bothered trying. Days when the doubts of others echoed louder than his attempts to rise. But for the first time, he didn't let those moments decide his fate. He let them fuel him. Every snicker, every dismissive look, every underestimation reminded him of the stranger's words. Doubt is just a test. And a test wasn't meant to break him. It was meant to reveal who he could become. One afternoon, an opportunity arrived unexpectedly. The company needed someone to present a small section of a project. Normally, Arun would have looked away, hoping no. One suggested his name, but this time his hand moved before his fear could stop it. "I can do it," he said. The room fell silent for a moment. A few eyebrows lifted. A few people exchanged surprised glances. It wasn't doubt, it was disbelief. And strangely, that gave Arun strength. Because disbelief is simply doubt wearing a more dramatic coat. Preparing for the presentation became his personal battle. He practiced in the mirror, stumbling, restarting, correcting himself, only to stumble again. He recorded his voice, cringing at every imperfect sound but listening anyway. And at some point during those late-night practice sessions, he realized something important. Improvement didn't feel like magic. It felt like repetition. Ugly repetition. The kind that makes you want to quit. The kind that makes you wonder if progress is even happening at all. But each attempt sharpened something inside him. Not his English, his endurance. The day of the presentation arrived with cold, sweat, and shaky hands. Arun stood in front of the conference room, heart pounding, throat dry. Every doubt he'd ever heard suddenly resurfaced, trying to pull him back into silence. But he remembered the napkin. He remembered the humiliation. He remembered the moment he almost gave up, and he remembered that none of his small steps had been wasted. So he began to speak. His voice wasn't perfect. His sentences weren't flawless. But he was clear. He was steady. And he didn't hide. He didn't rush. He didn't apologize. With each word, he reclaimed a little more of himself. The room stayed quiet, not dismissive, not mocking, but attentive. And when he finished, there wasn't applause. There didn't need to be, because the victory wasn't in their reaction. It was in the fact that he had finally shown up for himself. But little did he know, this was just the beginning, because everything he had learned was about to be tested in a way he never expected. The real test arrived on a day that should have been ordinary. Another meeting, another room full of people, another project update. But this time, the stakes were different. Not because the task was bigger, but because everyone who had ever doubted Arun happened to be in the same room at the same time. The managers who overlooked him, the co-workers who talked over him, even the colleague who once took credit for his work. As he entered the room, he felt the old fear press against his ribs. That familiar whisper returned, "You don't belong here." And for a moment, he almost believed it again. But then he took a breath, a long, steadying breath, because he knew something now, something doubt could no longer erase. He wasn't here to prove anything to them. He was here to prove something to himself. When the meeting began, the discussion quickly grew chaotic. People threw ideas around carelessly, voices overlapping, egos clashing. Arun watched quietly at first, letting the noise settle. But when the conversation reached the project he had been working on for weeks, he felt something inside him shift. Doubt nudged him, hesitating, resisting. But he straightened his back and spoke. "I'd like to explain this part," he said. No trembling, no shrinking. Just calm intention. The room fell silent, surprised by his confidence. Some faces tightened, others softened, but none of it mattered. Aaron began presenting, not with perfection, but with clarity. He explained each step of the project, each decision, each idea, and this time he didn't rush. He owned it. Halfway through, a manager interrupted with a question that would have shattered him months ago. But instead of panicking, Arun paused, considered it, and answered clearly. Another colleague challenged one of his points. He didn't flinch. He explained his reasoning with steady confidence, grounding each word. For the first time, people weren't reacting to him with doubt. They were listening, truly listening, because confidence, even imperfect confidence, changes the way a room hears you. When he finished, there wasn't thunderous applause, no dramatic celebration, just something far more powerful: respect. Even the people who once dismissed him exchanged glances that said what they didn't dare to admit out loud. He's not the same person he used to be. And in that moment, Aaron realized something important. The world hadn't suddenly become kinder. People hadn't magically stopped doubting him. What had changed was him. He didn't need them to believe in him anymore, because now he believed in himself. After the meeting, a coworker approached him with a quiet smile and said, "You've really improved." It wasn't much. It wasn't poetic. But to Aaron, it felt like confirmation, not of his worth, but of his growth. Because improvement wasn't about outshining others. It was about outgrowing the version of yourself that fear created. As he walked home, that evening, the city lights reflected in the puddles beneath his feet. The air felt lighter. His steps felt freer. He wasn't perfect. His English still had flaws. His confidence still wavered sometimes. But now, those things didn't scare him. They motivated him, because he had learned the one truth doubt tries hardest to hide. Confidence doesn't come from being believed in. Confidence comes from refusing to stop, especially when no one believes in you. And maybe that's the lesson meant for you too. When everyone doubts you, it's not the end of your story. It's the beginning of the version of you that even doubt can't break.